Hello, and a very warm welcome in to Raising the Dots, a monthly podcast connecting you with the people, ideas and technology reshaping the future of Braille and tactile literacy. I'm your host, Dave Williams. Coming up this time on Raising the Dots, we'll be meeting Peter Cracknell, a Braille technology expert from Australia, and I popped over to Bristol to meet Holly Baker, a talented mathematician and computer scientist dipping more than just a finger into the world of multiline Braille technology. That's all to come this time on Raising the Dots. Before we get started this month, just time to let you know that the good folk from DOT will be out and about in May, June and July 2026, both in Europe and North America, Site City, the DAISY technical meetings in Norway, the consumer conventions of the National Federation of the Blind and the American Council of the Blind in July, and many more events besides. If you'd like a bit of a rundown of where we're going to be, we hope you can come along. Visit blog.dotincorp.com. That's blog.dotincorp.com. And if there's an event where you think we should be, then you can drop us a line, info@dotincorp.com. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, thoughts about the podcast or any of DOT's products. That email address again, it's info@dotincorp.com. Peter Cracknell can trace his career in assistive technology back to 1994 and Telesensory UK. Well, a bit's happened since then. Peter now is working in assistive technology for the Education Department in Queensland, Australia. And so I caught up with Peter to hear about his thoughts around DotPad and the evolution of Braille technology over the last 30 years. Can we just wind back the clock? You started out in this industry in 1994. How did that happen?
I was actually working at the London Coliseum in St Martin's Lane in the front of house. So I was working with the theatre manager, and this was back in 1989. At that time, there was a big edict that theatres and public spaces should become more accessible. And I was tasked with doing an audit of the theatre to see how accessible it was and make some recommendations, which I did. And that's really my first contact with disability, I guess. So obviously it was wheelchairs, ramps and that sort of thing, but it included Sennheiser hearing loops. It included alternative format for the brochures and so on. And it included, of course, audio and Braille. So that was my first exposure to that. My first connection. I sort of grew close to that field over some years. At the same time, I was also doing a lot more with computers. As you remember, Dave, back at that time, the PC was a very new thing. Windows was just invented. But it was an exciting time. And one day I saw an advert from a company called Telesensory. It was a very simple advert. It said, "Do you think you could teach blind people to use computers?" I thought, wow, I wonder if I could. So I applied, and that's how I started in the field of assistive technology for blind people. So in those days, it was Screen Power Braille. This is pre-JAWS days. It was Vista. It was VersaBraille, and the Braille notes, the early Braille notes, Braille and Speaks, that sort of stuff. So that also was a very exciting time for technology. I was there with Telesensory for a short while in London because I wanted to migrate to Australia, which I did in 1996, and joined a company called Optech Systems in Sydney, and they were the Telesensory distributor. I was with them for 6 years. That was another interesting time. We did a lot of work with things like the Mentor tactile graphic system, with the Picture Braille. And I then joined Quantum in 2002 under Tim Connell. At that time, Quantum was very focused on manufacturing the Mountbatten Braille writer, which you probably know, Dave, the Mountbatten Braille writer.
I do.
Yes. So we were manufacturing that for some years. It was a very successful product for Quantum. That was the P after pictures and the flash tactile image maker. And Quantum was also the master distributor for JAWS. So though I had a lot to do with low vision technology as well, grew more aligned with the Braille technology. And I was doing that as a product um, and a product specialist until just last year, till October last year, when I made the jump to the public service. So I got this wonderful job with the Queensland Department of Education as a technical officer for assistive technologies, which means essentially that I can spend 100% of my time doing stuff with Braille and technology and all the really exciting stuff that's happening right now today, which is just going to have such an impact on education, which has always been very close to my heart. And though I'm not teaching directly, I'm supporting the teachers, the teacher aides, I'm supporting the alternative format, and basically an advisory capacity and a capacity building capacity. So here I am a few months in and absolutely loving it, Dave. It's wonderful.
I'm interested in those early experiences, Peter. Telesensory, of course, a name synonymous with Braille technology. What did you learn about the role of Braille, and in particular digital Braille, from those early experiences in your career?
The thing that struck me most, and this is observational, because I wasn't teaching Braille, I was an instructor for Braille devices, but the thing that struck me most was how a blind person could be perhaps giving a presentation or in a meeting and be fully engaged in an auditory way with the audience, but still able to review notes in a very natural way because able to use both parts of the brain compared to just using audio. And we see this today where people are using, say, JAWS or VoiceOver in one ear and trying to hold a conversation with people. It's just a very disjointed experience. It's unsettling for both parties. Whereas the level of confidence that a competent Braille reader with an electronic device had was just a quantum leap compared to a pure audio experience. That's the thing that struck me most. The second thing that struck me was the huge advantages of being able to search for keywords, to be able to use that digital power to quickly scoot through thousands of words and compare that to the paper Braille experience. I think those were the two things that struck me most, and this was before we were really connecting them seriously to computers. And that, of course, is the third huge ingredient, the ability to connect to Windows computers.
Do you remember any of the devices or products particularly? Were there any that stood out for being especially great or not great?
My experience was that those days was just limited to the Braille note. Some of the concepts for navigation are just exactly the same as they were back then. It just shows you how robust some of the thinking was in terms of the shortcut commands and the chord commands and so on. So, I didn't have at that stage, a wide experience of different Braille displays. So I couldn't compare to some of the European ones at that time. I have since then I have been able to. And that's another thing that struck me over the years was the difference in the equipment, depending very much on the difference in the funding environment. So a lot of the European Braille displays were very highly featured and beautiful quality, but just too expensive for us in Australia, for example.
Yeah, I think my first Braille display actually was from Telesensory, and it broke down, and I remember getting it was a second-hand display. It wasn't new. It had been around the block a bit, and half the cells stopped working and I needed to get a component, which I was able to find somebody online with it. And I think George Bell, in the end, his company Technovision, carried out the repair for me. So I was quite delighted that I was able to get it repaired without, sending it back to the factory. So, right. When did you first start thinking about multiline Braille then? Because, of course, products in the 90s, they were all single line as they were in the noughties and beyond. When did those conversations start to take shape, and when was the first time you encountered a multiline Braille or tactile graphics display?
I don't think I was thinking about multiline until fairly recently, though I was always thinking about surely there must be other ways of raising dots. And so I kept an eye on that, and it's very interesting to see, and it still is very interesting to see the various different approaches to raising dots. And it probably didn't hit me until I actually saw the Monarch in action and the dot pad about the same time. And this is talking recent, of course. So I think that gives you an idea that really it's not been until the last few years that this has been a possibility, and therefore people can actually dare to dream about what could be done. Whereas in the past, we were always very limited by the piezo cell, and of course that had a big limitation of what you could actually construct in terms of multi-line. It's interesting that people that have, I think quite rightly said, yeah, but why do we need multi-line? And perhaps one of the strongest arguments for that is, well, we've only really got a few points of contact with two hands. I think the thing that I come back to is in talking with Braille readers, and I'm talking about, tactile Braille readers, not sight Braille readers, is the experience compared to paper Braille and the value that people place in being able to quickly scoot up a few lines at once, but keep your finger in a paragraph further down the page. I think that's a pretty good starting point for thinking about how multi-line can benefit, the benefits of paper Braille compared to digital Braille.
Earlier, you talked about, robust thinking and how some of the navigation conventions that were developed for assistive technologies in the 90s are still around. And of course, that is the case with single line Braille displays. But of course, that's not how blind people learn Braille, right? We learn Braille on paper, and you've got that kind of spatial understanding of how information is arranged vertically as well as horizontally. And even though for most people we're reading with our fingerprints, there is a technique known as hand scanning, where you're kind of using your whole hand to feel, well, where is the information located on the page? And then, of course, tracking, is equally valid vertically as it is horizontally, right? So when you're looking for, well, where does the next paragraph start? Or how is this information laid out, and what does that mean? So we are just at the beginning, I think, of starting to understand how to navigate multi-line Braille, and this is obviously something that you've been giving thought to. And in I think it was 2023, you wrote a report, I think, about the dot pad. This was the previous generation dot pad, not dot pad X as we have now. Just talk, if you would, a little bit about that process. What did you do? Who did you go to see? And what did you write?
I invited Dot Inc. and they were keen to do this, to come to Australia and do a tour to meet key educators, to meet teachers, to meet alternative format producers, blindness agencies, to show the dot pad as it was then, to really just get some feedback from these people as to what the opportunities might be, what the obstacles might be, how such a device, the concept of multi-line, could it be integrated into existing practice? How would it work with existing Braille production and so on? How did it feel? Part of that was about the tactile aspect, the tactile graphics aspect, and part of it was about the possibility that it could be a multi-line Braille display. So that was back in 2023. We had some terrific feedback. I was collating all of that and just summarising that plus my views. I have to say at that time, my view was, and I was speaking as a product manager, of course, with a view to should we take on the dot pad. My view was at that time it wasn't really ready for our market. It had some very interesting tactile graphics features, but I argued that it really needed to be a multi-line Braille display. The technology was just around the corner. All that was missing was a multi-line protocol for the screen readers. And this size device, about the size of an iPad, struck me as being about the right size for highly portable, that kind of Kindle experience. That, in my mind, what I think we're all crying out for was a sort of Kindle size device. Now, of course, there's arguments for bigger format. Obviously, it's always lovely to have more Braille, but that has an impact on the weight and the size and so on. So essentially at that time, I felt there were a lot of things that needed to happen before it could become a product. But was very pleased to see over the last year especially how the product has improved with the DotPad X in a couple of ways, Dave. One is, of course, in the way it works with JAWS and NVDA now as a multi-line display. That's, for me, the primary, most exciting thing. But the DotPad X, all of that has been just completely improved. The refresh is, I wouldn't say instantaneous, but it almost feels instantaneous. It's just on the technical side, absolutely fantastic engineering. So that's a huge positive and very, very encouraging. We're now at a point when it's a serious contender and certainly will do very, very well in a number of areas, in education, also in the employment as well, and as a personal device. So great, very encouraging to see. It's just a great, exciting time for the technology, and we're just at the beginning of working on what can we do with these devices.
Well, that's good to hear. Progress has definitely been made in terms of refresh speed and screen reader support, and of course the whole multi-line industry now is starting to expand. What's missing, do you think, Peter? I know that you've worked with Dot on and off, and you've provided lots of great feedback over the years. What do you think are the key places where the industry and maybe even DotPad needs to focus next?
Well, we could argue forever about exactly how big the array should be. Currently, you've got 30 cells, which is great. I personally would prefer 32 or a little bit more. The width, I think, is perhaps a little bit more important than the depth, but there is room in the package to do that. Well, I don't know under the bonnet whether there's room, but there's certainly room in that sort of iPad size footprint. There's a number of things that I think would really improve the product. One would be cursor routing. So you don't need to take your fingers off the reading surface, that you could actually do your cursor management directly on the surface. I know that's something the Monarch can do. It'd be lovely if the DotPad could do that too.
Have you had a chance to try that on the Monarch?
Yes, I have. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and that works. It takes a little bit of practice. I found the best technique is to do the double tap on the button. It's a natural thing to do. You're up to this point, you want to bring your cursor to that point. And I think, aside from text, it's also perhaps would be useful in the graphic side of things too. So you've got the dot canvas that comes with the DotPad ecosystem. In fact, I think I said it in my report back in 2023. It would be really wonderful if a blind person could actually draw on the surface itself, not on an iPad or something like that, but actually draw on the surface itself. And you would need cursor routing, or at least finger locators to be able to do that. But I think it's a missing ingredient in tactile graphics is we spend a lot of time producing the best possible tactiles for consumption by blind people, but pay less attention to the possibility that blind people could create their own tactile drawings and diagrams. And I know personally, as a sighted person, how invaluable being able to scribble and draw sketches is for my understanding of things and my learning. So I think that equally could be important for blind people if they have the ability to draw on the surface itself. Another thing I'd like to see is Braille key entry. And I know that's not possible at the moment on the DotPad X, but I'd love to see that you could actually, a couple of things. One, obviously, just to type a quick note. A quick-on type Braille editor would be wonderful. Nothing too fancy. I'm not talking about editing Word documents or anything like that. I'm just talking about just that quick Braille editing for notes. But the Braille key entry is also, I think, very important for other things. So, for example, the Desmos graphing calculator, which is a web calculator, that has got 6-key entry capability. And it would be wonderful if the DotPad could, as the Monarch already does, have that 6-key entry or Perkins entry to type Braille maths expressions straight into Desmos. And then, ideally, the next extension would be to graph that as the Monarch already does. Coming from an education point of view, this is a huge area for me. Maths, improving maths capability is hugely important subject for me. There's also access to things like the UEB online learning systems and other learning systems. It would be great if you could use 6-key entry directly from the DotPad. Also, maybe to navigate Braille books, you might have BRFs loaded into some sort of internal storage, and to be able to navigate with bookmarks and so on, that would be wonderful. A lot of people said when in 2023, they'd really like an offline capability. It's great to have the online, we understand that, but to have an offline capability to read books would be fantastic. The other thing I would like to add to the canvas, dot canvas, would be, and this links to cursor routing as well, would be to be able to, imagine you're able to cursor route to a part of the graphic and then have an audio tag speak out loud some extra information. This is something that other products like the Tactonom in Germany do beautifully, where you can declutter the tactile and have that extra information as audio when you want it. So I think that would be really powerful to be able to use audio judiciously and keep the tactile experience quite clean. Mm. Those are the things. There's lots of little things that we could talk about, but for me, those are the main things I'd love to see in the DotPad.
A world of possibilities there, Peter, certainly, and quite a shopping list. And I really hope that we will see some of those things. It's worth noting some customers are using Orbit Writer as a Braille keyboard for Braille key entry alongside the DotPad. That's one possibility. And on that point about synchronizing audio and tactile graphics, I think there is a feature in Canvas where when you display a slide, you can have a piece of audio play that can describe the content of that slide. So perhaps not exactly what you're describing, but certainly a step in that direction. So all great feedback and really good to receive it. And thank you very much.
It was very exciting to know that not only is the technology maturing so quickly, but the team of engineers and the DOT team itself is growing, that the awareness of DotPad is growing, and the community of programmers, because it's open source, is also adding apps as well. So I think that's such an exciting development.
Yeah, and I have to say as well, I'm excited about the fact that an increasing number of blind people are now working directly with Dot, including myself, to try and make sure that the voice of the customer is well represented in future product development. So heading in the right direction, I think, and we certainly need allies like you, Peter, keeping us on it and funneling that feedback from the people that you speak with and the clients that you speak with. Just before I let you go, where do you think we'll be, in sort of 5-10 years time? Somebody who's had, I don't want to say long, it makes you sound old, Peter, and I don't want to do that, but you've been in this sector for a little while, and that gives you perspective, I think, about where we've come from and where we are. How would you characterize the future for Braille technology in the next sort of 5-10 years?
Gosh, so that's quite a long time frame as well, 5 to 10 years. And when I say that, it's because of the impact that AI is having on everything. So I really think that AI is going to accelerate some of those possibilities for Braille and tactiles. I mean, the multi-line aspect, partly it's about economics, of course. It's obviously more expensive to have so many cells of Braille compared to single line Braille displays. But if you take something like the 80 cell Braille displays are more expensive than the dot pad. So I think that's definitely going to change the landscape for single line Braille displays. In fact, I might just turn that a little bit round and David, ask you, would you not use a single line Braille display yourself, given where dot pad is? Could you just have a dot pad?
I think I would use both, depending on the context and what I need to do. We talked about cursor routing, and of course, the approach that some products take is that you put your finger in a position and then you, with your other hand, press a button. Most Braille readers have got multiple fingers in play, right? And so which finger are we routing the cursor to, and all of that. And so there's a lot of testing and design work needed to try and solve that. Whereas the single line kind of cursor routing approach, is very, very tried and tested. So right now, I would want to have my cake and eat it.
Yes, that's the same for myself. I have a pencil, I have a pen, I have a computer. I wouldn't say I just want to use a pencil, or just use a computer. So obviously, it's the same. But the only thing I would say is that in a classroom situation, we do have to be mindful of weight and unpacking this and connecting that and so on.
Yeah.
So something. As I mentioned before, I would love to see something where you could have like a quick on, where you could get some of the pencil and paper type benefits, but then have all of the massive connectivity benefits when it was connected to your whatever gizmo was flavor of the month. So you're probably right. We won't be just using one thing for everything, one ring to rule them all. But it's certainly something I'd like to see more multi-line devices in the very, very near future.
Indeed. And, the exciting thing, I think, about the dot cell technology is just more things are possible, right? Yes, in terms of multi-line, but also putting Braille displays in places where perhaps they wouldn't have previously been, so Braille in kiosks, for example. And so more Braille in the world hopefully makes us as blind people more independent and more productive. And then back to education, that really emphasizes then the need to continually invest in Braille education and Braille skills and Braille literacy, because it is something that you're going to need to be independent. And there's often this false dichotomy between audio and Braille, right? And well, surely blind people, they can make do with audio. And for me, we don't need to make it a competition. I want audio and Braille.
Yes, but you want to be literate first.
Yeah,
And this is what Braille gives you is
yeah,
literacy. After that, yes, of course, we'll use audio. And as you say, they complement each other beautifully. But there's a danger that if we emphasize audio too much, we'll lose on the literacy side. And that's the danger. And that in education, that's why we're making such a huge push
yeah.
for investment in Braille.
And for me, literacy isn't just this kind of arbitrary literacy for its own sake, right? Or literacy for being, credible in employment. I love talking about reading the bedtime story with my son because had I put an audiobook on and left the room, there were many moments when he would stop me, ask me questions. We'd talk about things, it's a bonding experience. It's part of
Yes,
developing human relationships when we can read to each other. And for me, Braille was the best tool for that.
yes, yes, indeed. No, it's you'll be pleased to know certainly here in Australia there's a big renewed push to Braille. Um, a lot of effort and a lot of consensus that it is absolutely a critical path to literacy.
And we're delighted at DOT to be a sponsor of the Global Braille Literacy campaign, which has been led in part by Francis Gentle from Australia.
Oh, lovely, yeah. Another mentor of mine.
There we are. Lots of we're standing on the shoulders of giants, Peter.
We are indeed, yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, sharing your expertise, your feedback, your suggestions. We really value that. Let's keep this conversation going. Do you have a presence on LinkedIn or anywhere that people can follow your work, Peter?
Yes, LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn. I'm not a I'm not very good with LinkedIn, Dave.
You're not a
I,
prolific poster. Some people never stop, do they?
I know, I know. I'm not, but just occasionally I will, and I'll certainly follow other people in LinkedIn. So, but yes, you can. Everybody can reach me on that. I think my profile has been updated to show that I'm now with the Department of Education, but but yes, you can find me there.
Peter Cracknell, Technical Officer, Access Technologies with the Queensland Department of Education. Thank you so much for joining us on Raising the Dots.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Holly Baker is a talented mathematician and computer scientist working in the PhD research department at the University of Bath. Holly has recently dipped more than a finger into the world of multiline Braille, and so I popped over to Bristol to learn more about Holly's experiences and experiments with this emerging technology.
Hi Dave, my name's Holly Baker. I'm currently an associate lecturer at Bath Spa University, teaching computing, so introductory programming and mathematics, and my background is in computer science. I was lucky enough to learn Braille when I was in primary school, so I used a Perkins Brailler in class up until the age of about 11. Then I started to use a laptop with HAL, the screen reader on it, for quite a while. And then thinking about 2012, when I was getting to do my GCSEs, I was starting to experience some problems with getting access to all of the materials in Braille and having them transcribed from handwritten Braille into print to give back to the teachers and to get hold of all of the resources. So my dad and I went and purchased our own laptop. It was actually a MacBook because it had the built-in accessibility, and I ended up using that throughout my GCSEs, A-levels and my undergrad degree. So unfortunately I moved away from Braille for a while because I couldn't really get access to the Braille that I needed. However, when I went back in 2020 to do a PhD, I got access to a refreshable Braille display, and this was really transformative for the way that I accessed mathematics and programming I've got enough vision to see the screen really close so I can see maybe one or two words on the screen, but I rely heavily on speech. However, there is things that speech can't communicate as efficiently as Braille can. Things like programming, things like maths, where you need to know how many spaces there are, how many opening brackets there are. You need to know which is the numerator or the denominator of a fraction, and that's where Braille really comes into its own. I didn't know that multiline Braille really was a thing until October of last year when I met Ed Rogers, the founder of Bristol Braille, when he was showing off his Canute at a local convention. And I thought, wow, this is really something special, and got quite into it.
Let's just establish your credentials, because you're quite accomplished in academia. Just tell everyone your areas of speciality.
I did my undergraduate at the University of Bath in computer science. Then I did a year in industry at a local company making web-based patient management systems. I went back there for another year to work as a graduate software developer, but I really wanted to continue studying, so I went back and did a PhD in theoretical computer science, where I was focusing on the maths underpinning computer science, so algebraic geometry, complexity analysis. My topic was cylindrical algebraic decomposition, and I graduated last summer, and now I'm working as a lecturer at Bath Spa.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You've done amazing things. So when you first encountered multiline Braille, what did you notice, first of all, that made you think this changes things?
I noticed that you got a lot more information, which is kind of an obvious statement, but I live in the command line. I'm a Linux user, and when you're using the command line with either speech or Braille, you're given a whole load of information, which is the output of the previous command, and then your Braille display shows you a blank prompt, so you have to scroll back and kind of see what's going on, whereas with multiline, you can see the history of all of your commands, and when you're reading stuff, you can see the context around the line that you're reading. So I'd find on a single line display, I might get lost in a big document, whereas with multiline, I had all of the context and I could smoothly read quite a lot of information without having to continuously pan.
That word comes up a lot, actually, context. And for somebody who's, worked in maths and logic and structure, what does multiline mean for accessing those disciplines?
I'd have to say the two biggest things for me would be code and tables. So things like source code, where you need to know the context of where you are. You need to know, am I inside of a loop or an if statement? Am I inside of a function? What variables have been declared before the line that I'm on? And stuff like Python, where indentation is really important. It defines the flow control of your program. With multiline Braille, you can quickly scan how deeply indented a block of code is, and you can quickly see where you are. Regarding tables, you can see tabular information so much more easily in multiline Braille. You can scan down columns. So I've been using this in spreadsheets for marking coursework, and I can do things like scanning up to see, the student I'm marking was a little bit better than the last one, but not quite as good as the one two before, and I can review all of this information all in one go. And one thing which I was really amazed by right at the start was I was preparing a lecture on graph theory, where we needed to display a graph structure, which is a bunch of nodes which are connected to each other by edges. So you need to define what's connected to what. And there's a way of doing this, which is an adjacency matrix. It's a rectangular table of values. And if you go to row I, column J, it says that there is a connection between node I and node J. And I found myself scanning a two-dimensional adjacency matrix in Braille, and I could have one hand running down the rows and the other hand running along the columns, and it was wonderful.
Did multiline Braille, you mentioned speed there, and of course, speed is not the only sort of aspect. There's fluency, there's understanding, there's confidence. What's been the biggest impact for you when thinking about how you access information using multiline digital Braille?
I'd have to say, as a lecturer, confidence was the biggest boost from Multiline Braille, but that comes from being able to access information and being able to access information more quickly and being able to have access to all of this context. So when I'm presenting a lecture, I'll take my Multiline Braille display with me and I can have access to all of the notes, whereas before I'd have to learn what I was going to say in advance. So it gives me a lot more flexibility to take on a new course or to feel like if I need to refer back to something, it's always there. It's also great being able to use the same tools as my colleagues. So I mentioned spreadsheets. Bristol Braille have developed a really quite accomplished spreadsheet application that works with Excel files. It does the formulas, it lets you truncate the data. And in previous years when I was marking, my colleagues would say, "Are you comfortable with spreadsheets?" And I'd say, I guess. And I'd kind of struggle along with large text and with speech, and using a spreadsheet in Multiline Braille was the first time I got to see more than one cell at a time. And now I can confidently say to my colleagues, yes, I can use spreadsheets and I can edit their spreadsheet on my Canute console and then I can give it back to them.
So you're a bit of a tinkerer as well, I think it's fair to
Yes.
say. You've worked up some of your own kind of solutions to some of the technical challenges that you've been facing. Just talk about some of those projects.
So my background's programming and I'm a bit impatient. I see a problem and I want to try to solve that problem. So one thing that I noticed was Bristol Braille have made a load of software and it's all open source. So I have access to their code and I have access to their libraries. And I noticed that they made a tactile transport map. And a transport map is just a bunch of stations that are connected to each other. And that's a graph. In computer science, that's a graph. So I managed to adapt their code in a weekend to make it show any graph in graphviz dot format or in a CSV file. And I was using that to present a class on graph theory the next Monday. The other thing that I worked on was more for fun than anything else, a little chess app where I thought games would be really great in Multiline Braille. And we have 9 lines to play with. I can get a chessboard to show on this thing. And again, in a couple of hours in Python, I made a chess app where it showed all of the pieces and all of the cells in Braille and let you play against the computer or against your friend. Another thing I made in, again, 20 minutes or so was I found a Python library which gave you all the information on the periodic table. So it gave you the elements' names, it gave you their atomic number, it gave you their symbol, and it gave you their position, and a whole load of other information. I'm not a chemist, so I didn't fully understand all of this information, but what I was able to do was make a 2-dimensional periodic table that I could display in Multiline Braille and look at information about each element.
How important do you think it is then that developers of multi-line Braille products really open up to that kind of hacker community, I guess, publish those SDKs and APIs so that third parties can come along? So many technology products today are kind of closed, right? They're sealed. They don't necessarily want you to spin up your own projects. And it sounds like, what you've found is that actually there is real value in being able to experiment and develop your own solutions. How important is that, do you think?
I think this is really, really important. I'm massively pro open source and pro sharing work that you've done. This enables us in kind of a niche of a niche. Braille is a niche, Multiline Braille is even more of a niche. To take existing solutions and adapt them to solve a very specific problem that we may have. And it prevents us from being trapped in an ecosystem or being restricted by the limitations of what the manufacturer has allowed you to do, which I find very frustrating in both mainstream and assistive devices. And it lets us do exactly what we want to do. It gives us freedom. It gives us power.
What skills do you think Braille readers need to develop to get the most out of this transition from single to multi-line refreshable displays?
Perhaps the biggest one is spatial awareness. So, when we were looking at stuff like the transport maps, where you can see which stations are north, south, east, or west of each other, you kind of need to have that concept in your head about what's north, south, east, and west and get used to navigating a two-dimensional sheet of Braille. Also, learning to interact with Braille with two hands is quite important because I might be reviewing a spreadsheet, I might be going down two columns and comparing their values, and I can have one finger on one column and the other finger on another column.
Okay, so that kind of tracking, discriminating, spatial awareness, all of those things really are going to be key if you're going to get the most out of a multi-line Braille device.
Yeah.
In terms of content, I mean, if somebody's not a developer, right? What does good content need to look like, in your opinion, for multi-line Braille devices to really fulfill their promise?
I think that good content has to respect the spatial arrangement of the input, right? So a map has to be spatially arranged correctly. It can't just be a list of locations and their positions on a grid. Or if I'm converting a document, it has to show me this is a title, this bit's centered, this bit's bold, this is a table, and this table's laid out just as it would be in print. So having a good parity between what your sighted colleagues are seeing and what you're looking at in Braille is really important. And also taking advantage of interactivity. So going back to the graphs and the maps, if I'm looking at a big transport map and I've got all of these train stations, but I just need to know where I can get to from Bristol Temple Meads, I want to be able to hide all of those stations, look at those, and then re-show all of the other stations.
Have you dabbled at all with graphics, charts, graphs, any of that, or has it really been mainly about the Braille for you?
For me, it's been mostly Braille because the display I have is a cell-based display. It's not a tactile graphics display, so it lends itself really nicely to spatially arranged Braille characters, but you can't necessarily draw stuff like I think one of the famous examples is the iPhone icons on a dot pad. You couldn't really draw those effectively. However, you can get quite far if you start being creative with your Braille characters. So one of the demos that Ed has produced for the Canute console is a football pitch, and the football pitch feels like a football pitch. You can feel where the center circle is, you can feel where the goals are, and you can feel where the line is in the middle and the boxes, and you can feel where the ball is. So I think you can, if you are creative, even use these cell-based displays to draw graphics.
You've been extremely successful in your education. How do you think this multi-line Braille technology could change expectations for other Braille readers coming through?
I think it could be transformative in the sense that a Braille reader can have access to all of the content that they need. They're not restricted by what can be manually prepared into Braille and embossed. A lot of it's done by hand, so we can have access to the same content as our peers, and we can have access to the same kind of context as our peers. So we're not having to rely on speech or a single line of Braille, which is really good, but it also requires quite a bit of training and getting used to because you're having to hold a lot of information in your head. Whereas with multi-line Braille, all of the information is on the display in front of you.
Yeah, there's some subjects where layout really matters, right?
100%.
Yeah.
So I mentioned coding, I mentioned mathematics, so things like matrices, or even something as simple as a system of simultaneous equations, where you can look at all of the equations on one display, or if you're reading music and you have multi-part music and you can read all of the parts lined up with the bars lined up one on top of each other.
What do you think are the biggest barriers in getting this technology under more fingers? Is it just cost, or do we need to think about training and awareness and confidence building? What for you are the biggest barriers at the moment?
I think all of those are very relevant. Cost is quite relevant because, as we're all aware, a lot of blind and visually impaired people are not in employment, and we rely on things like access to work or disabled students allowance or what our educational authority can provide us with. So lowering the cost of Braille would be amazing, but it's also about training. It's about training children to read Braille from a young age. It's training children who might have some vision to read Braille as well. Braille's not just for completely blind people. I have some useful vision, but I find Braille is massive. It's much less tiring to read Braille than it is to try to struggle away looking at 1 or 2 words magnified on a screen. And I think it would be really important for people in education, so the people providing education and the people at universities, to become aware of what's available, to find out what these multi-line displays can do, what they can display, and indeed find out what the different types of displays, so cell-based or tactile graphics, are best at and what's best suited to their needs.
And it's not just technical subjects, is it? Just before we started recording, you were talking about just simply being able to read in bed, right?
100%. It's a pleasant experience to read on a multi-line display. So we used to get the books through the RNIB, and when I was in school, I'd have the book in bed and I'd really enjoy reading a book. And then I left school and all the books used to come through school, so I sort of went away from that for a while, which was a real shame. I've read on a single line display, and it's okay, you can read the book, but you're panning all the time and it becomes quite tiring, whereas reading on a multi-line display, especially something like the Canute, which is massive, it's got 40 cells, 9 lines of Braille, you can sit there and read a book for hours and it's comfortable and it's enjoyable and it's pleasant.
Looking ahead then, maybe 5 or 10 years, how do you hope this segment develops? What would success look like were we to get more multi-line under more fingers?
My hope is for more high quality content, more screen reader support, and more people using this to be successful in whatever way they want to be.
Is there any way listeners can keep across your work and research and things that you're working on?
There is one thing which I'm working on in collaboration with my colleagues at Bath Spa and with Ed here. We're going to start a group called the Braille Space, where people who are interested in Braille, particularly multi-line Braille and particularly STEM subjects, can come and meet up and discuss things and share ideas and build together. So we're doing one on the 29th of April, but we're hoping to make this a regular event where people can come to perhaps the workshops in Bedminster and play around with multi-line Braille, or maybe we'll go on tour somewhere. Maybe you'll see us at a university near you.
Fantastic. Well, Holly Baker, really appreciate all you're doing to get the word out about the benefits of multi-line Braille technology. We know it makes a big difference, and we need to go out there and share it with the world. So thank you so much for joining us on Raising the Dots.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for promoting multi-line Braille and making it something exciting and something that people know about.
That's it from Raising the Dots this time. Do stay in touch. info@dottingcorp.com is how you connect with us. And don't forget that blog where we list our events, both virtual and in person. That's at blog.dottingcorp.com. But from myself, Dave Williams, and the rest of the team, until next time, bye for now.